The vultures knew before Catherine Dorsey did. Their black wings carved lazy circles against the bone-white Nevada sky, and their shadows danced across the sand like death's own fingers. She pulled her mare to a halt, squinting through the shimmering heat haze. 3 miles behind her, dust kicked up from the horizon, a cavalry patrol moving fast. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She had maybe 20 minutes before they caught her scent. 20 minutes to decide whether to ride hard for the next water stop or investigate what had drawn the scavengers. That's when she saw him. A man sprawled in the alkali dust, his buckskin shirt dark with blood, one arm twisted at an unnatural angle. Even from 30 yards, she could see the rise and fall of his chest, barely there like a whisper of wind. His long black hair was matted with crimson, and his copper skin gleamed with fever sweat. Shoshone. The word hit her like a physical blow. Every rational thought screamed at her to wheel her horse around and ride. The cavalry behind her would shoot her on sight if they found her helping a hostile. But something deeper than reason held her transfixed, her mother's voice, clear as church bells across 13 years of silence. Don't turn away from the hunted, Catherine. That's when we lose our souls. The dust cloud grew closer. The man's eyes fluttered open dark as midnight and found hers across the wasteland. In them she saw no plea for mercy, no desperate hope, only the quiet dignity of a warrior facing death. That look shattered her paralysis. She spurred her horse forward. Catherine hit the ground, running her medical supplies already in hand. Up close, the damage was worse than she'd feared. A bullet had punched through his left thigh, the wound angry and infected. His ribs were cracked, maybe broken, and his right arm hung useless at his side. But those eyes stayed sharp, tracking her every movement. "You're cavalry bait if you stay," he rasped in accented English, his voice like gravel. "Ride away, white woman. Shut up and let me work." Catherine shot back, tearing strips from her last clean shirt. The cavalry dust was maybe 2 miles out now. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, pressing fabric against the bullet wound, binding it tight with leather from her saddlebags. She had to make a choice. Her trading post lay 15 miles northeast, but between here and there stretched open ground where the cavalry would spot them like ants on a dinner table. To the west rose a maze of red stone canyons and slot washes where a person could disappear, but the terrain would be hell on a wounded man. "What's your name?" she asked, checking his pulse. Weak but steady. "Toma." He winced as she shifted his arm. Chief of the Eastern Shoshone, or was before. His jaw clenched. "Before my own cousin sold us to the soldiers." The dust cloud was close enough now that she could make out individual riders. 8 men, maybe 10. Catherine made her decision. She hauled Toma upright, ignoring his grunt of pain, and half-carried, half-dragged him toward her horse. "You're insane," he muttered. "Yeah, well, sanity's overrated." She boosted him into the saddle, wincing at his sharp intake of breath. "Can you ride?" Toma gripped the saddle horn with his good hand. "I'll manage." Catherine swung up behind him and kicked the mare into a gallop toward the canyons. Behind them, a bugle call split the desert air they'd been spotted. The first rifle shot cracked across the flats as they reached the canyon mouth. Catherine felt the bullet whine past her ear, close enough to smell the sulfur. She drove her heels into the mare's flanks, and the animal plunged into the narrow passage between towering walls of red sandstone. The canyon twisted like a snake, barely wide enough for a horse and rider. Catherine had been through here before. It was a smuggler's route she'd used to avoid federal taxes on her trade goods. But that had been alone, on foot, taking her time. Now, with Toma's weight throwing off her balance and cavalry behind them, every turn was a gamble. "Left fork ahead," Toma gasped. "Leads to water." "How do you know that?" "My people have hidden in these canyons for generations." His voice was fading. "There's a sacred pool, if we can reach it." Hoofbeats echoed behind them. The cavalry had entered the canyon. Catherine took the left fork, praying Toma was right. The passage narrowed until her stirrups scraped against the walls. Then suddenly it opened into a hidden amphitheater of stone. A spring bubbled up from the rocks, forming a crystal-clear pool no bigger than a wagon bed. Ancient Shoshone symbols were carved into the canyon walls, spirals and lightning bolts that seemed to dance in the firelight as the sun struck them. Catherine slid from the saddle and eased Toma down. He was unconscious now, his breathing shallow. She tore open his shirt to examine the bullet wound. The infection was spreading red lines radiated outward like the fingers of death itself. She cleaned the wound with spring water, then dug into her medical kit for the last of her laudanum. As she worked, she became aware of voices echoing from the canyon, the cavalry arguing about which fork to take. "Split up, you idiots." The voice was harsh, commanding. "Rourke wants that Shoshone bastard alive." Catherine's blood turned to ice. Captain Silas Rourke, she knew that name. He'd been hunting Shoshone bands across Nevada for the past year, always claiming they were hostile, while seizing their traditional lands for mining companies. If he wanted Toma alive, it meant torture first, then a show trial, then a very public hanging. Toma's eyes fluttered open. "They're coming for me," he whispered. "They're coming for both of us now," Catherine replied grimly. She checked her rifle 12 rounds, against 8 or 10 trained cavalry. The odds were not encouraging. "There's something you need to know," Toma said, struggling to sit up. "In my medicine pouch there's a map. It shows the location of our winter camps, our sacred sites, our silver mines. If Rourke gets it..." Catherine found the leather pouch tied to his belt. Inside, wrapped in oiled deerskin, was a piece of birch bark covered with intricate symbols and markings. Even to her untrained eye, it was clearly valuable and dangerous in the wrong hands. "My cousin Joseph drew this," Toma continued bitterly. "He was supposed to lead our people to safety. Instead, he sold us to the whites for silver." The sound of approaching horses grew louder. Catherine made a quick decision. She stuffed the map inside her shirt, then helped Toma to his feet. "There's another way out of here." Toma nodded toward what looked like a solid wall of rock. "Hidden passage. Used to be a mine shaft. Comes out 3 miles north." They stumbled toward the back of the amphitheater, just as the first cavalry trooper appeared at the canyon mouth. Catherine fired once, sending him diving for cover, then helped Toma through a gap in the rocks that was invisible until you were right on top of it. The mine shaft was a throat of absolute darkness. Catherine felt her way forward with her hands, Toma's weight heavy against her shoulder. Behind them, she could hear the cavalry searching the amphitheater, their voices growing increasingly frustrated. "Where the hell did they go? They can't have just vanished. Rourke's going to have our hides if we lose them." The tunnels seemed to go on forever. Catherine's legs burned with the effort of supporting Toma's weight, and her lungs ached from the thin air. Just when she thought she couldn't take another step, she saw a glimmer of light ahead. They emerged onto a plateau overlooking a vast expanse of desert. To the north, she could make out the smoke from cooking fires, an Indian camp. But between them and safety lay miles of open ground with no cover. "Now, my people," Toma breathed, pointing at the distant smoke. "The survivors from our band. But Rourke will be watching them." Catherine studied the terrain. There was an old wagon road that curved around to approach the camp from the east, but it would add hours to their journey. Toma was already burning with fever. She wasn't sure he'd last that long. Then she saw the dust cloud. A single rider approaching fast from the southeast. As the figure drew closer, she could make out a Shoshone brave, on a paint pony riding hard. "It's Running Bear," Toma said with relief. "My war chief, he must have seen the cavalry." The warrior pulled up before them in a shower of dust and gravel. He was young, maybe 25, with intricate tattoos covering his arms and a rifle slung across his back. His dark eyes took in Catherine with undisguised suspicion. Or, "What is this white woman doing with you, Chief?" he demanded in English, his accent thick but clear. "She saved my life," Toma replied weakly. "The cavalry. I know about the cavalry." Running Bear's gaze never left Catherine's face. "They've been asking questions in town about a white woman who helps Indians." His voice was loaded with skepticism. Strange how they knew to look for her. Catherine felt her temper flare. "If you think I'm working with them, I think a lot of things, white woman." Running Bear's smile was cold as winter wind. "I think it's convenient that you found our chief just as the soldiers were closing in. I think it's interesting that you're still alive when they shoot every other white who helps us." "Enough." Toma's voice cracked like a whip. "She carries the sacred map. She could have given it to Rourke already if she served him." Running Bear's eyes went wide. "You still have the Winter Grounds map, but Joseph said—" He stopped himself, jaw clenching. Joseph said what? Catherine's instincts were screaming now. Running Bear looked between her and Toma, clearly torn. Finally, he spoke. "Joseph told us the map was lost when the cavalry attacked. He said Chief Toma died with it." A terrible silence fell over them. In the distance, Catherine could hear the thunder of approaching horses the cavalry had found their trail. They rode hard through the gathering dusk, Running Bear's paint pony carrying double with Toma barely conscious in the saddle. Catherine pushed her mare to its limits, but she could hear the cavalry gaining ground behind them. The Shoshone camp was still miles away, and Toma was failing fast. "There's an old trading post ahead." Running Bear called over the thunder of hooves. "Ghost Creek Station. Been abandoned for years, but there might be supplies." Catherine knew the place, a ramshackle collection of buildings that had once served travelers on the California Trail. The owner had pulled out after too many Indian raids, leaving it to the wind and weather. They crested a low hill and saw the station below a main building, a barn, and a corral, all looking like they might collapse at any moment. But it was shelter, and right now, that was all they needed. They reached the station just as the first cavalry shots rang out behind them. Catherine helped Running Bear get Toma inside while bullets splintered the wooden walls around them. The building was a wreck, broken furniture, shattered windows, and years of accumulated dust and debris. "How many rounds do you have?" Running Bear asked, checking his rifle. "Maybe 20, Catherine replied. "You?" 15. He peered through a gap in the boarded windows. "I count 8 soldiers. They're setting up for a siege." Toma was unconscious again, his breathing labored. Catherine checked his pulse, rapid and thready. The bullet wound had reopened during the ride, soaking his shirt with fresh blood. "We need to get him to your camp," she said. "He needs a medicine man." "Our medicine man is dead." Running Bear replied bitterly. "Killed in the massacre, along with 37 others." His voice was raw with grief and rage. A voice called from outside, harsh and commanding. "You in the station. This is Captain Rourke, United States Cavalry. Send out the Shoshone and the woman, and nobody else has to die." Catherine crawled to the window and peered out. Rourke sat his horse in the center of the clearing, a tall man with gray hair and cold blue eyes. Even at this distance, she could see the calculation in his gaze. He was figuring angles of attack, counting his advantages. "What do you want with Chief Toma?" she called back. "That's between me and him," Rourke replied. "But you, Miss Catherine Dorsey, yes, I know who you are. You're wanted for treason against the United States government. Aiding and abetting hostile Indians is a hanging offense." Running Bear looked at her sharply. "How does he know your name?" Catherine's blood ran cold. She'd been careful to avoid attention trading under false names, staying away from the larger settlements. For Rourke to know her real identity meant someone had been watching her for a long time, or someone had told him. "You've got 1 minute to decide," Rourke shouted. After that, we burn you out." Running Bear was checking his ammunition, his face grim. "The back wall is rotted through," he said quietly. "If we could create a distraction..." Catherine nodded. "I'll give them something to shoot at. You get Toma out of here. You'll die. Maybe. But if they take that map, your entire people die." She checked her rifle one last time. "Besides, my mother always said there are worse things than dying." Running Bear studied her face for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, he smiled, the first genuine expression she'd seen from him. "You fight like Shoshone white woman." "What is your warrior name?" "Catherine." "No. Your Shoshone name. What your enemies call you when they whisper around their fires." She thought for a moment. "Wind that cuts." Running Bear nodded approvingly. "Good name. If you survive this, you will always be welcome in our lodges. Wind that cuts." Outside, Rourke was shouting the countdown. 30 seconds. Catherine took a deep breath and kicked open the front door. Catherine's first shot took down a cavalry trooper before he could even raise his rifle. Her second shattered the shoulder of another, sending him screaming to the ground. The remaining soldiers dove for cover behind their horses, returning fire that splintered the doorframe around her. She rolled to the side, finding shelter behind an overturned table, and kept shooting. Each shot was carefully aimed, conserving ammunition while keeping the cavalry pinned down. She could hear Running Bear moving behind her, getting Toma through the hole in the back wall. A trooper tried to flank around the building's left side. Catherine put a bullet through his thigh, dropping him in the dust. Another attempted to rush the door. She caught him center mass, and he went down hard. But her ammunition was running low, and Rourke was too smart to let this go on much longer. She saw him gesturing to his remaining men, spreading them out in a classic pincer movement. In minutes, they'd have her surrounded. That's when she heard the war cry. Running Bear's voice rose above the gunfire, a blood-freezing shriek that seemed to come from the very stones of the desert. Catherine saw him appear on the station's roof, outlined against the darkening sky like an avenging spirit. His rifle cracked once, twice, and 2 more cavalry troopers went down. In the confusion, Catherine made her break. She sprinted for the back of the building, bullets whistling around her ears. Running Bear provided covering fire from above his shots, precise and deadly. She found Toma propped against a boulder, 50 yards behind the station, conscious, but barely. His dark eyes were lucid, though, tracking her movement as she ran toward him. "The map," he whispered. "Safe." She helped him to his feet, wincing at his sharp intake of breath. "Can you ride?" "Do I have a choice?" Running Bear's paint pony was ground-tied nearby. Catherine boosted Toma into the saddle, then swung up behind him. Behind them, the gunfire was dying down. Either Running Bear was out of ammunition, or Rourke had pulled back to regroup. They rode north toward the mountains, and Catherine allowed herself to hope they might actually make it. The Shoshone camp was less than 5 miles away, now hidden in a box canyon that could be defended against cavalry. That's when she saw the dust cloud ahead of them. More cavalry, at least a dozen riders moving to cut off their escape route. Rourke had planned this well. He'd driven them into a trap. "Joseph," Toma said bitterly. "He told them which way we'd run." Catherine hauled on the reins, turning the horse toward a narrow ravine that cut between 2 mesas. It was their only chance, if they could reach the rocks before the cavalry closed the gap. They almost made it. The first bullet took their horse in the chest. The animal stumbled through them both from the saddle and went down hard. Catherine hit the ground, rolling her rifle flying from her grasp. Toma landed badly, his injured arm twisted beneath him. Catherine dragged him toward the ravine as bullets kicked up dust around them. They reached the rocks just as Running Bear appeared, materializing from the shadows like a ghost. His face was streaked with blood, and his shirt was torn, but his rifle was steady in his hands. "Or this way," he shouted, leading them deeper into the maze of stone. Behind them, Catherine could hear Rourke's voice bellowing orders. "Surround them. Don't let them reach the main canyon." The ravine twisted and branched like a river delta. Running Bear led them through turns that seemed random, but were clearly part of some ancient knowledge passed down through generations. The walls rose higher on either side, blocking out most of the sky. Finally, they reached a dead end, a sheer cliff face that rose 200 feet straight up. Catherine's heart sank. They were trapped, but Running Bear was grinning. He pressed his hand against what looked like solid rock, and a section of the cliff swung inward on hidden hinges. "Sacred place," he said simply. "Old ones built it to hide from enemies." They stumbled into a natural cathedral lit by shafts of sunlight from cracks in the ceiling. Ancient Shoshone paintings covered the walls, buffalo hunts, war parties, and spiritual visions rendered in ochre and charcoal. And in the center of the chamber, around a small fire, sat a group of Indians. Catherine recognized the leader immediately, even though she'd never seen him before. He had Toma's strong jaw and intelligent eyes, but where the chief radiated nobility, this man seemed to carry some inner corruption that had eaten away at his soul. "Joseph, the traitor. Cousin." Toma's voice was steady despite his pain. "I should have known you'd be here." Joseph rose from beside the fire, and Catherine saw he wore cavalry blue beneath his buckskin shirt. A sergeant's stripes gleamed on his sleeves. "Hello, Toma. You look terrible. Not as terrible as you." Toma's eyes blazed with fury. "How much did they pay you? What was the price for our people's blood?" Joseph's smile was bitter. "You still don't understand, do you? This isn't about money. It's about survival. The whites are coming whether we fight them or not. I chose to be on the winning side." Running Bear had his rifle trained on Joseph, but two other braves flanked him. Joseph's followers, apparently. Catherine counted the odds and didn't like what she saw. "You murdered our own people." Running Bear snarled. "I saved the ones I could." Joseph gestured to the handful of Indians around the fire. "These are the survivors Toma. 17 people out of a band of 60. The others are dead because of your pride. They're dead because you led cavalry to our winter camp. They're dead because you refused to see reason." Joseph's composure cracked, revealing the rage beneath. "I tried to convince you to move the people to the reservation. You wouldn't listen. So I had to find another way." Catherine watched the dynamics in the chamber, her hand inching toward the knife on her belt. Joseph's followers were nervous. They kept glancing toward the entrance as if expecting trouble, which meant they weren't sure their leader was doing the right thing. "The map, cousin." Joseph held out his hand. "Give me the winter grounds map and I'll make sure Captain Rourke treats you fairly." Toma laughed, but there was no humor in it. Fairly like he treated the women and children at Bear Creek. Joseph's face tightened. "That was regrettable, but necessary. You forced our hand." "Our hand." Running Bear's voice was deadly quiet. "You speak like one of them now, brother. You've forgotten your Shoshone." "I remember what matters," Joseph snapped. "I remember that my children need to eat. I remember that my wife needs medicine when she's sick. The old ways are dead, and you're too blind to see it." One of the braves by the fire, a young man with a scarred face, spoke up hesitantly. "Joseph, maybe we should—" "Shut up, Crowfeather." Joseph's hand moved to his pistol. "I didn't ask for your opinion." Catherine saw her chance. While Joseph was distracted, she lunged forward and grabbed a burning brand from the fire. She whipped it across the chamber, scattering sparks and plunging half the space into darkness. In the confusion, Running Bear fired. One of Joseph's followers went down hard. Toma, despite his injuries, threw himself at his cousin, and they went down in a tangle of limbs. Catherine drew her knife and went for Joseph's other supporter, but the man was quicker than she'd expected. His rifle butt caught her in the stomach, doubling her over. She rolled aside as he tried to club her again, then swept his legs out from under him. They fought in flickering light and shadow ancient cave paintings, seeming to dance around them like spirits. Catherine managed to get her knife against the man's throat just as Running Bear's rifle spoke again. Sudden silence fell over the chamber. Joseph lay on his back, Toma pinning him down, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. The two followers were down, one dead, one unconscious. "The map," Joseph gasped. "They'll kill everyone if they don't get it." "They'll kill everyone anyway," Toma replied sadly. "You know that, cousin. You've always known it." Joseph's eyes filled with tears. "I just wanted to save someone, anyone. Then help us now." Toma's voice was gentle. "Help us save our people the right way." For a moment, Catherine thought he might do it. Joseph's face seemed to crumple, years of guilt and shame finally showing through the hardened exterior. Then they heard Rourke's voice echoing from the ravine outside. "I know you're in there. Send out the chief and the map, or I'll blow this whole place down." Joseph's expression hardened again. "It's too late," he whispered. "It's been too late for a long time." The first explosion shook dust from the ceiling. Rourke had brought dynamite military charges designed to blast through fortified positions. If he used enough of it, he could bring down the entire chamber. Running Bear checked his ammunition. 8 rounds left. Catherine had lost her rifle in the fight, leaving her with just her knife and a derringer she kept in her boot. 2 shots. Toma struggled to sit up, his face gray with pain. "There's another way out. Behind the altar stone. But it leads to Sacred Mountain." "What's at Sacred Mountain?" Catherine asked. It was Joseph who answered, his voice bitter. "The silver mine. The real reason Rourke wants that map." He laughed harshly. "Tell her, cousin. Tell her about the curse." Toma's eyes flashed. "It's not a curse. It's a warning. Sacred Mountain is where we bury our dead. The silver runs through their bones." Another explosion, closer this time. Rock fragments showered down around them. "The spirits of our ancestors guard that place." Toma continued. "No white man who has entered the mine has ever come out alive." "Superstition." Joseph spat. "The deaths were accidents. Cave-ins, bad air, rock falls. Rourke knows the truth. There's enough silver in that mountain to make him the richest man in Nevada." Catherine was studying the ancient paintings on the walls. Now that she looked closer, she could see they weren't just hunting scenes and spiritual visions. They were maps, detailed topographical guides showing the location of water sources, game trails, and sacred sites throughout the region. And in the center of it, all rendered in silver-white paint that seemed to glow in the firelight, was Sacred Mountain. "That's what Rourke really wants," she said suddenly. "Not just the winter grounds. He wants the exact location of the mine entrance." Toma nodded. "The silver veins run deep, but there's only one safe way in. The ancestors sealed all the other passages." A third explosion rocked the chamber, and this time, Catherine heard the ominous crack of stone under stress. They had minutes before the whole place came down. "Where does the back passage lead?" she asked. "Straight to the mine entrance." "But Catherine..." Toma gripped her arm. "If we go there, Rourke will follow. And once he has the mine, he'll have the resources to destroy every Indian tribe in Nevada. Then we make sure he doesn't get it." Running Bear looked at her sharply. "What are you thinking? Wind that cuts." Catherine's mind was racing, pieces of a plan falling into place. The ancestors sealed the other passages, right? What if we sealed this one too? Understanding dawned in Toma's eyes. "You want to bring down the mine. Can it be done?" "The support timbers are old. And if the spirits are willing?" He smiled grimly. "Yes, it can be done." Joseph was shaking his head frantically. "You're insane. That mine is worth millions. You can't just destroy it." "Watch us," Catherine said. The fourth explosion brought down a section of the wall. They could hear Rourke's men shouting, preparing for another charge. "The passage is behind the altar," Toma said, pointing to a massive stone block covered with carvings. "But it takes 3 men to move it." Catherine looked at the surviving Indian's crow feather and an older woman named Singing Bird both of whom had remained silent during Joseph's confrontation with Toma. Their faces showed they were torn between loyalty to their chief and fear of their uncertain future. "A crow feather," Toma said gently. "Your brother died at Bear Creek, didn't he?" The young brave nodded, his scarred face twisting with grief. "Help us make sure he didn't die for nothing." Crow Feather looked at Joseph, who glared back defiantly. Then he moved to the altar stone. "I will help." Together, they managed to shift the massive block, revealing a narrow tunnel that disappeared into the mountain's heart. Catherine could feel cold air flowing from the depths, carrying the scent of ancient stone. And something else, something that made her skin crawl. "The mine is haunted," Singing Bird whispered. "The spirits of the dead walk there." "Good," Catherine said grimly. "Maybe they'll help us." A fifth explosion brought down half the ceiling. They were out of time. The tunnel was barely wide enough for a single person. Catherine led the way, feeling along the walls in absolute darkness, while Running Bear helped Toma behind her. The passage twisted and climbed, following the mountain's natural contours. Behind them, she could hear the thunder of collapsing stone as Rourke's explosives brought down the sacred chamber. The sound echoed through the tunnels like the death cry of some ancient god. They climbed for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Catherine's lungs burned from the thin air, and her muscles screamed with exhaustion. Toma was barely conscious, supported entirely by Running Bear's strength. Finally, they saw light ahead, not the warm glow of fire, but the cold, silver radiance of moonlight. The tunnel emerged onto a narrow ledge halfway up Sacred Mountain's face. Below them, the desert stretched away into infinity. Above the peak loomed like a sleeping giant, and directly across from their ledge, carved into the mountain's heart, was the mine entrance. It was larger than Catherine had expected, a gaping maw easily 20 feet wide and twice as tall. Ancient Shoshone symbols were carved around the opening, and the silver veins were visible even from their position, running through the rock like frozen lightning. "How do we get across?" Catherine asked. The gap between their ledge and the mine was at least 30 feet. Running Bear pointed to an old rope bridge, its planks weathered and broken. "Built by the first miners. But it hasn't been used in years." Catherine tested the rope. It was frayed and weak, but it might hold their weight if they were careful. "Can you make it across with Toma?" "I can try." That's when they heard the sounds of pursuit from the tunnel behind them. Rourke had found their trail. Catherine made a quick decision. "Get Toma across. I'll hold them off. You only have 2 shots. Then I'll make them count." Running Bear hesitated, then nodded. He slung Toma over his shoulder and started across the bridge. The ancient wood groaned under their weight, and several planks fell away into the abyss below. Catherine positioned herself at the tunnel mouth, derringer in hand. The sounds were getting closer, boots on stone harsh, breathing the occasional clank of military gear. The first soldier appeared in the tunnel, opening rifle raised. Catherine put her first shot center mass, and he toppled backward with a scream. The second man was more careful, using his fallen comrade as cover. She waited, counting heartbeats. When he finally showed himself, she was ready. Her second shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. But now her derringer was empty, and she could hear more men coming. Running Bear had reached the mine entrance with Toma. He waved to show they were safe, then disappeared into the tunnels. Catherine was on her own. She grabbed a loose stone and threw it down the tunnel, hearing a satisfying grunt as it connected with someone's skull. But it was a delaying tactic at best. She needed to reach the mine before Rourke's men overwhelmed her position. The rope bridge swayed sickeningly as she stepped onto it. Below, the mountainside fell away into darkness. She forced herself not to look down, focusing instead on the mine entrance ahead. Halfway across, a rifle cracked behind her. The bullet splintered the plank next to her foot. Catherine quickened her pace, feeling the ancient rope stretching under her weight. Another shot closer this time. She felt the wind of the bullet's passage against her cheek. The bridge was falling apart beneath her planks, dropping away one by one. With 10 feet to go, she heard the distinctive sound of a rope under stress, a deep, thrumming note that spoke of imminent failure. Catherine abandoned caution and lunged forward, diving for the mine entrance as the bridge collapsed behind her. She hit the stone ledge hard, scraping her knees and elbows raw. But she was across. Behind her, Rourke's voice echoed from the opposite cliff. "A clever Miss Dorsey. But you've only trapped yourself. There's no other way out of that mine." Catherine picked herself up and looked around. The mine entrance was even more impressive up close. The silver veins ran through the walls like frozen rivers, and the ancient Shoshone carvings seemed to glow with their own inner light. Running Bear emerged from the depths, his face grim. Toma is deeper inside. The mine goes down 3 levels, but the lower passages are flooded. How long before Rourke finds another way across? Dawn, maybe sooner if he has climbing gear. Catherine nodded. That gave them perhaps 4 hours to destroy a mine that had taken decades to excavate. "Show me the support timbers." The mine was a labyrinth of passages and chambers, all supported by massive wooden beams that had been cut from old-growth pine. Some of the timbers were thick as a man's waist, anchored deep into the rock. But Catherine could see the stress points, places where the weight of the mountain pressed down hardest. Toma was sitting in the main chamber, his back against a silver-veined wall. His color was better, and his breathing seemed easier. The mine's cool air was apparently helping his fever. "The spirits are strong here," he said as Catherine approached. "I can feel them. They don't want the white men in their resting place." Catherine examined the chamber's structure. It was enormous, easily 100 feet across and 50 feet high. The ceiling was supported by a network of interconnected beams that formed a complex geometric pattern. If we could weaken the main supports, she mused, the whole thing might come down. "It would take dynamite," Running Bear said, "or fire hot enough to weaken the wood." Catherine was studying the walls more carefully now. The silver veins weren't just decorative, they followed the natural fault lines in the rock. And where silver ran, other metals often followed. "Toma, what else do your people mine here besides silver?" "Copper, some iron, and—" He paused, his eyes narrowing. "Saltpeter, for making black powder for their hunting rifles." Catherine's pulse quickened. Saltpeter was one of the key ingredients in gunpowder. If there was enough of it, and if they could find sulfur and charcoal, where do they store the saltpeter? "The lower levels, but they're flooded now." "How deep is the water?" Running Bear shrugged. "Waist deep, maybe chest deep in places. But the passages are narrow. If the water is contaminated with mining chemicals," Catherine was already moving toward the tunnel that led to the lower levels. "We don't have a choice. Help me find anything we can use to make explosives." The descent into the flooded passages was like entering an underground ocean. The water was icy cold and stank of sulfur and other minerals. Catherine waded forward, feeling along the walls for side passages. She found the storage chamber 20 feet down a side tunnel. The water was chest deep here, but wooden crates floated near the ceiling. Catherine managed to pry one open and found bags of white crystalline powder saltpeter still dry inside their oiled wrappings. "Running Bear," she called, "I need you to help me carry this." Together, they hauled 3 bags of saltpeter back to the main chamber. Catherine's teeth were chattering from the cold water, but her mind was racing. She had saltpeter, and the mine probably contained sulfur from the natural deposits. That left charcoal, which they could make from burning wood in the absence of air. Toma watched their preparations with growing understanding. "You're going to blow up the mine. That's the plan. And us with it." Catherine paused in her work. She hadn't wanted to think about that part. There might be a way out through the upper passages. Or maybe, Catherine. Toma's voice was gentle but firm. "Look at me." She met his eyes, seeing the quiet acceptance there. "If this is the price of stopping Rourke, then it's a good death," he said simply. "My people will live because this place dies. That's enough." Running Bear nodded grimly. We are already dead men. We have been since the massacre. This just gives our deaths meaning. Catherine felt tears stinging her eyes. She'd known this moment would come, had known it since she first chose to help a dying Indian in the desert. But knowing and experiencing were different things. My mother would be proud, she said quietly. Tell me about her, Toma said. As Catherine worked to prepare their improvised explosives, she told them about Mary Dorsey, a schoolteacher who had tried to protect Shoshone children from a lynch mob, and died for her compassion. She spoke of her mother's last words, her belief that every life had value regardless of color or culture. She sounds like a warrior, Running Bear said when Catherine finished. She was, just a different kind than you're used to. They worked through the night gathering materials and preparing charges at key structural points throughout the mine. Catherine's knowledge of chemistry, learned from years of mixing medicines and trading in chemical supplies, served her well. The improvised gunpowder wouldn't be as powerful as military dynamite, but it would be enough. As dawn approached, they heard sounds from outside horses, men's voices, the clank of equipment. Rourke had found a way across the chasm. I know you're in there. Rourke's voice echoed through the mine passages. You've got nowhere to run, Miss Dorsey. Send out the chief and the map and I'll make your death quick. Catherine was putting the finishing touches on their last explosive charge. They'd placed powder kegs at 7 key support points throughout the mine. The fuses were cut to different lengths designed to create a cascading collapse that would bring down the entire mountain. How long until they reach the main chamber? She asked. Running Bear peered down the entrance tunnel. Minutes. They're moving carefully, but they're coming. Toma struggled to his feet, his face determined despite his injuries. I should be the one to light the fuses. This is my mountain, my responsibility. You can barely stand. I can strike a match. Catherine was about to argue when she heard a familiar voice from the tunnel, harsh, bitter, and filled with self-loathing. Chief, it's Joseph. I'm coming to talk. Toma's eyes flashed with anger, but he nodded to Running Bear, who lowered his rifle. Joseph emerged from the tunnel alone, his hands raised to show he was unarmed. But Catherine noticed he still wore his cavalry sergeant's stripes. Rourke's offering terms. Joseph said without preamble, surrender the map and he'll let the surviving members of our band live on the reservation. Continue fighting and he'll hunt them down one by one. What about us? Catherine asked. Joseph's smile was bitter. You die either way, but at least the others live. Toma studied his cousin's face. And you believe him? I have to believe him. It's the only hope we have left. No, cousin. It's the only hope you have left. Toma's voice was sad but resolute. The rest of us chose a different path. Joseph's eyes widened as he saw the explosive charges placed around the chamber. You're going to destroy the mine. Are you insane? This silver could buy our people a future on blood silver. Running Bear said contemptuously. Built on the bones of our ancestors. Better it stays buried. You don't understand, Rourke has over 100 men out there. He's not just going to walk away if you blow this place up. He'll take it out on every Indian in Nevada. Catherine felt a chill of doubt. Was Joseph right? Would destroying the mine just make things worse for the surviving Shoshone? That's when she heard the other voices from the tunnel. Cavalry troopers moving closer. Joseph hadn't come alone after all. How many men does he have with him? She demanded. Joseph's face tightened. Enough. How many? Cousin Toma's voice was deadly quiet. 6, maybe 8. Running Bear was already moving rifle up and ready. But Catherine held up a hand, stopping him. Joseph, she said quietly. Look around this chamber. Really look at it. Joseph's gaze swept the ancient carvings, the silver veins running through the walls, the sacred symbols that seemed to glow in the lamplight. This is where your ancestors are buried. Catherine continued. This is holy ground, and you're going to let Rourke turn it into just another hole in the ground to make rich men richer. Better than letting our people starve on the reservation. Is it really? Toma stepped forward, his voice filled with infinite sadness. Joseph, what happened to you? What happened to the boy who used to sit with the elders and listen to the old stories? For a moment, Joseph's composure cracked. Catherine saw the pain in his eyes, the weight of all the choices that had led him to this moment. That boy died at Bear Creek, Joseph whispered. When I watched my daughter take a cavalry bullet meant for me. The words hung in the air, like a physical presence. Even Running Bear lowered his rifle slightly. I tried to save her. Joseph continued, his voice breaking. I tried to save all of them. But I was too late, too weak, too human. He looked at his hands as if seeing blood on them. So I made a deal with the devil. I thought if I could give Rourke what he wanted, he'd leave the survivors alone. And has he? Catherine asked gently. Joseph's laugh was broken glass. He's used me to hunt down 3 other bands. Promised me each time that it would be the last. That we were finally buying safety for our people. But it's never the last time, is it? Toma said. Because men like Rourke are never satisfied. They always want more. The sound of approaching boots grew louder. They were running out of time. Help us, cousin, Toma said urgently. Help us end this the right way. Joseph looked between them, his face a mask of anguish. Then he straightened, and for a moment, Catherine saw the man he used to be, the proud Shoshone warrior who had once stood beside his chief. What do you need me to do? The plan was simple, but desperate. Joseph would return to Rourke and tell him the fugitives were ready to surrender, but only to Rourke himself, and only in the sacred chamber where the negotiations could be witnessed by the spirits of their ancestors. It was exactly the kind of Indian superstition that would appeal to Rourke's arrogance. While Joseph led Rourke and his men deeper into the mine, Catherine, Toma, and Running Bear would light the fuses and retreat to the upper levels. With luck, they might survive the initial collapse long enough to find another way out. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all they had. Joseph gripped his cousin's hand one last time. If we don't survive this, we will, Toma said firmly. Our spirits will. That's what matters. Joseph nodded and disappeared back into the tunnel. Catherine checked her watch. They had maybe 10 minutes before Rourke arrived. Running Bear, get Toma to the upper levels, she ordered. I'll light the fuses. We do it together or not at all. Running Bear replied stubbornly. Catherine started to argue, then saw the look in his eyes. This was about honor, about dying like warriors rather than running like rabbits. She nodded and began moving toward the first fuse. They worked quickly but carefully, lighting each charge in sequence. The mine filled with the acrid smell of burning black powder. Catherine could hear voices echoing from the entrance tunnel. Rourke's harsh commands, the nervous chatter of his men. Last one, Running Bear, called from across the chamber. Catherine was reaching for her final fuse when she heard Joseph's voice clear and carrying through the tunnels. This way, Captain. They're in the sacred chamber, just as I promised. But there was something wrong with his tone, too bright, too eager. Catherine realized with growing horror that Joseph was trying to warn them, which meant Rourke suspected a trap. She lit the final fuse just as the first cavalry trooper appeared in the chamber entrance. The man took one look at the burning charges and started screaming warnings. Catherine dove for cover behind a silver-veined pillar as rifle fire erupted around her. Rourke's voice boomed over the gunfire. Secure those charges, don't let them. The first explosion cut him off. The blast wave knocked Catherine flat and chunks of rock rained down from the ceiling. She rolled aside as a massive timber crashed down where she'd been lying. The second charge went off, then the third. The mine shook like a living thing in its death throes. Catherine could see Running Bear across the chamber, helping Toma toward the passage that led to the upper levels. But cavalry troopers were pouring into the chamber, and the route was blocked. The fourth explosion brought down a section of the ceiling. Catherine saw one trooper disappear under a cascade of stone, his scream cut short. Others were firing wildly, their shots ricocheting off the silver-veined walls. Through the smoke and chaos, Catherine saw Rourke himself, a tall figure in a cavalry officer's coat, his face twisted with rage. He had his pistol trained on Toma, who was slumped against a pillar with Running Bear shielding him. "The map!" Rourke shouted over the thunder of collapsing stone. "Give me the goddamn map or I'll kill you all right now." Toma struggled to his feet, his hand moving to the medicine pouch at his belt. For a moment, Catherine thought he was going to surrender. Then she saw his fingers close around something else, a small stick of dynamite he must have taken from their supplies. "You want the map, white man?" Toma's voice carried clearly through the chaos. "Come and take it from my ancestors." He pulled the pin and hurled the dynamite toward the largest concentration of silver veins. Catherine saw Rourke's eyes widen in understanding just before the blast tore the heart out of the mountain. Catherine woke in darkness so complete she thought she'd gone blind. Her head throbbed, her ribs ached, and something heavy was pinning her legs. But she was alive. She worked her way free of the rubble, feeling around in the darkness. Her fingers found a timber that was still warm. Apparently, the explosions had started a fire somewhere in the mine. Following the warmth, she found a pocket of air where several beams had fallen in such a way as to create a small shelter. Running Bear was there, unconscious, but breathing. A gash on his forehead leaked blood, but his pulse was strong. Of Toma, there was no sign. Catherine called his name softly, not wanting to trigger another collapse. No answer came back. She found her way to where she'd last seen the chief, following a trail of disturbed rubble. Her hands touched fabric then, flesh still warm, but motionless. Toma lay buried under a pile of stones, his eyes closed, a peaceful expression on his face. The medicine pouch was still tied to his belt. Catherine opened it with trembling fingers and found the map intact, its birch bark surface unmarked, despite everything that had happened. But as she lifted it, her fingers brushed against something else, a small silver pendant carved with Shoshone symbols. A voice spoke from the darkness, weak but unmistakably alive. "Give it to my people. Tell them. Tell them the sacred places are safe." Catherine turned toward the sound and found Toma's eyes open, reflecting what little light filtered down through the rubble. He was dying. She could see it in the gray pallor of his skin and the labored rise and fall of his chest. But his gaze was clear. "The mountain spirit protected us," he whispered. "Rourke and his men are dead. The mine is sealed forever. Don't talk. Save your strength." Toma's smile was peaceful. "My strength goes to you now, wind that cuts. You will carry our story to the world." His hand gripped hers with surprising force. "Promise me. Promise you'll tell them what happened here." "I promise." Toma's eyes closed and his breathing grew shallow. "My mother used to sing when I was afraid." Catherine found herself humming a lullaby her own mother had sung, a gentle melody that seemed to ease some of the mountain's terrible silence. Toma's breathing grew slower, more peaceful, until finally it stopped altogether. Catherine sat in the darkness for a long time, holding the hand of a dead chief, while his war chief slowly regained consciousness. She thought about promises and sacrifices, about the price of doing what was right in a world that seemed determined to punish righteousness. When Running Bear finally stirred, she helped him sit up and told him what had happened. He listened in silence, then placed his hand on Toma's chest in a gesture of farewell. "We need to find a way out," he said finally. "The spirits have preserved us for a reason." It took them 6 hours to dig their way to the surface. They emerged from a crack in the mountainside as the sun was setting, painted in shades of gold and crimson that seemed almost too beautiful for the world they'd left behind. Below them, the desert stretched away to the horizon. No sign remained of Rourke's cavalry. They were buried forever beneath tons of rock and earth. The silver mine was gone, sealed by its own greed and the spirits of the ancestors who guarded it. Catherine and Running Bear made their way down the mountain in silence, carrying with them the map that would guide the surviving Shoshone to new winter grounds, far from white interference. It was a small victory, perhaps, but it was theirs. 3 months later, Catherine stood in the office of the territorial governor in Carson City, Nevada. The map lay on his desk between them, its ancient symbols translated by Running Bear and transcribed into English. Beside it lay her written testimony about the events at Sacred Mountain. Governor James Bradley was a political creature, careful and calculating. But he was also a practical man who understood the value of peace on the frontier. You realize what you're asking for, Miss Dorsey. A full investigation into Captain Rourke's activities, pardons for the surviving Shoshone, and protected status for their new settlement. I'm not asking, Governor. I'm telling you what's going to happen. Catherine's voice was steady, but there was steel beneath it. Because if it doesn't, copies of this testimony are going to every newspaper between here and Washington, along with a certain map that shows exactly where Rourke was planning to build his silver empire. Bradley studied the documents for a long moment. Outside his window, Carson City bustled with the commerce of a growing territory. But inside this office, the weight of history hung like a physical presence. The federal government won't like this, he said finally. The federal government will do whatever prevents more massacres and bad publicity. Catherine replied. Especially when they learned that Captain Rourke was operating outside his authority, using military resources for personal gain. Bradley picked up his pen. You've given this considerable thought. I had 3 months to think about it. The governor signed the papers with quick, decisive strokes. The Shoshone Reservation will be established in Montana Territory as requested. The survivors will be granted safe passage and federal protection. As for you, Miss Dorsey, he looked up at her with something like respect. The charges of treason have been dropped. Officially, you were working as an undercover agent for the territorial government. Catherine nodded. It was a convenient fiction that served everyone's interests. And the mine, Sacred Mountain, is declared off-limits to mining operations. Permanently. Bradley's smile was thin. It seems the geological surveys show it's too unstable for safe excavation. Catherine left the governor's office with a sense of completion she hadn't felt in years. Justice, it seemed, was possible, even if it sometimes required a little creative interpretation. She found Running Bear waiting for her outside, mounted on a new horse and dressed in the finest buckskins she'd ever seen. Behind him, a small party of Shoshone warriors sat their horses with quiet dignity. It's done, he asked. It's done. Your people have their sanctuary. Running Bear nodded solemnly. Chief Toma's spirit can rest now. His sacrifice has meaning. He reached into his saddlebags, pulled out a small bundle wrapped in deerskin. This is for you, when that cuts. From the women of our tribe. Catherine unwrapped the bundle and found a necklace of silver and turquoise worked in traditional Shoshone patterns. At its center was a small silver pendant, a bird in flight wings outstretched against the sky. It's beautiful. It belonged to Chief Toma's mother, Running Bear explained. She wore it when she sang the old songs. He would have wanted you to have it. Catherine fastened the necklace around her throat, feeling its weight like a benediction. Thank you. No, when that cuts. Thank you. For showing us that not all white people have forgotten how to do what is right. The Shoshone warriors wheeled their horses and rode north toward Montana Territory and their new home. Catherine watched them until they disappeared into the heat haze, carrying with them the seeds of a future that might, with luck and courage, be better than the past. She touched the silver pendant at her throat and thought of Toma's last words. Tell them what happened here. She would keep that promise, she decided. Not just to the government officials and newspaper reporters, but to anyone who would listen. Because the story of Sacred Mountain wasn't just about a mine or a map or even a chief's sacrifice. It was about the moment when people choose between what is easy and what is right, and the price they pay for that choice. Catherine Dorsey mounted her horse and rode west toward the setting sun, carrying that story with her like a sacred trust. Behind her, Sacred Mountain stood silent against the sky, its secrets buried forever beneath tons of stone and earth. But the spirit of what had happened there would live on, passed from one generation to the next, a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of courage can change the world. In the years that followed, travelers through Nevada would sometimes speak of seeing a lone woman on horseback, riding the old trails between settlements. They said she carried medicines for the sick and supplies for the desperate, asking for nothing in return except the chance to help those who had nowhere else to turn. The Shoshone called her Wind That Cuts, the one who moved like the desert wind, swift and sure and free. Others knew her only as the woman who had defied the cavalry and lived to tell the tale. But Catherine herself preferred to think of it differently. She was simply a daughter, honoring her mother's memory, keeping faith with a promise made in darkness and sealed with blood. She was living proof that even in the harshest wilderness, even in the face of overwhelming odds, the human spirit could choose compassion over fear, justice over profit, and hope over despair. And in a land where such choices often meant the difference between life and death, that was a story worth telling. The silver pendant caught the light as she rode, flashing like a signal fire against the endless sky. Somewhere ahead lay another settlement, another group of people who might need help. Catherine Dorsey, Wind That Cuts, rode toward them with a smile on her lips and her mother's words echoing in her heart. Don't turn away from the hunted. That's when we lose our souls. She had not turned away, and she never would.